maybe with the NiP side of the equation. So we'll talk about the Essetag move overall, but in general, Paladin, where do you think NiP is at for you? Obviously, you just came off a top 8 at the major. What do you think of NiP going to this match and the potential of adding a new player?
So I rewatched the demo with the Ancient game that they had against CPH Flames, and I tweeted about this a ton. I just don't think that they were really up to snuff at the major, and they really skated on by because of LNZ's heroics on that map. And I personally just... I'm so 50-50 on this team. Like, sometimes when Device is on and at least Plopsky is on for a couple rounds, they look unstoppable. They look like a team that could be top 5, top 3 perhaps. But, you know, if they don't have a core like lineup that's firing on all cylinders, if Rez goes absent for even a little bit, they just really fall apart really quickly. And with that, their map pool also seems like something that just falls through because of it. And maps like Ancient really largely depends on individuals to perform. And if they're not able to do that, then how can you be a consistently top team? So I think firepower is like the number one issue that I have with the team. It's very flip-floppy. And if you have a consistent star like Device, I mean, it feels like a shoo-in that tick box would be cleared, but it doesn't feel like it ever.
What do you think, Hawker?
Yeah, I'd agree with that. It almost reminds me of Vitality in a sense, where I look down all the names and I just think like the firepower shouldn't even be enough really to do that well on this team in the first place. I do like the Essetag edition for a couple of reasons. And I think the main thing I hope he can bring to this squad is a clearer secondary voice on the team, because I really don't know who else was helping with calls on this squad. I think maybe LNZ was the guy who was kind of leading that site with Plopsky, because I know those two played a lot together, but he's so inexperienced. I just don't see him being the kind of guy that can properly do that to a good level. And I know that Essetag will come in and probably have good ideas. He's definitely a thinking player. I assume he should just slot in and give them some new ideas. So I really do like the move. I think it's just a small little upgrade. And yeah, the major... They just constantly look like a team that are just kind of all right, but I never really feel like they have the firepower or even, honestly, the team play that really struck through. Like, there was a period of time when this team was really good on Overpass, and I thought they had a lot of good fundamentals down where they were playing across the map, and slowly that seems to have just slipped away, and I don't really know why.
What do you think of the Essetag move, Paladin?
Yeah, I mean, I love it in the sense that it brings more structure to this team. It felt like there was a lack of identity for NiP in general when you have a player like Device and then you have a player like Rez who don't really like feel, you don't feel like they're a meshing of styles off the bat, but they somehow made it work with the way Hampus called the game. And that was the other thing. I know, Haka, you were talking about the secondary calling. That's a great addition to this team because as Maui has been talking about before, they have one of the worst T-sides out of like any top team, and that can't get you by to be a top 3 team. And especially on maps like Inferno, where you need a T-side to really fundamentally be a top team, I don't think that Hampus is going to cut it. So if we have extra ideas coming in from Essetag and somebody that's been around the block for a little while, who's been in a lot of situations and understands his roles and his positions, it can really elevate the stars of the team, and they don't have to really worry about the extra fluff on the team. They can just focus on killing people.
Yeah, the angle where I like the Essetag move is I'm thinking more of the flaw of the team. Like, Essetag's going to be like a quality journeyman player. He's probably going to do whatever role they ask him to do at a pretty good level, at least a tier 1 level. I don't expect him to obviously have crazy firepower or any of that garbage. Like, that approach they took in Cloud9, where they had him be the AWPer and stuff, that was purely from happenstance and the fact that he's just too amiable a guy and he said, yeah, I'll do the role. Like, there's no way that's the best role for him, obviously. So to me, the key thing here is, as long as you put in a bit more structure and another solid, consistent piece, then we'll actually see what Device, fucking Hampus, we'll see what these guys are actually made of when they're in this res, obviously. Like, we'll see who actually has the star power, like, factored. Because I even said this when Device joined this team. Everyone else was going the other way and going, wow, he could do all things he's never done. Like, maybe he'll be the number 1 player in the world. And I was just thinking, dude, you just played your whole career with 1 core of players and 2 of the best IGLs ever. Like, you don't really know what it's like to go into a team with all flawed players and a structure that might, by the way, in this case, almost like only half exists as far as I can tell. Like, they talk all the time about the NiP system. I don't really know what the NiP system is. I wouldn't, by the way, be bragging about having a system when you win 29% of your T rounds. I'd go ahead and even lie and just be like, we just play freestyle style and see what happens. Like, what system? Like, it's a terrible system. It doesn't work. It's like communism. It's a system. It might have been a great idea, but did it work? Don't answer that. That was just a rhetorical sidebar there, Paladin. You might learn this as your career goes on. It's the things you don't reply to that are say that keep your career safe, not what you do say. So let's jump in the other side, though. Obviously, we can't say too much about them, but we'll set them up a little bit. The main question when it comes to the new Astralis isn't like how good are they, whatever. Like, we can't really even speculate that. Just what do you think of these players in this particular formation? Start with you, Hawker. What do you think of the new additions? Where obviously they kept Glaive and Zipnix, and then Lucky is still there. They would obviously claim as a real member, but who the fuck knows with the straws. And then they added in, obviously, these blockbuster names of BlameF and Config, who, if you go back in time a year or so ago when they were on call, obviously they won one of these tournaments, actually a blast, when it was online. What do you think of these additions in the squad overall?
I think so. Just to start with, you have to, I think, just touch on Lucky because he's just not good enough like right now, and I think it's clear. I was looking at some of the numbers even. So for an AWPer, I want an AWPer to have really good CT numbers. I looked at the major, even on CT side, he had a 1.07 rating for the tournament, and that sounds fine, but most AWPers are doing really well at the event. On CT side especially. And the other thing is he's just barely taking many opening duels and getting opening picks. I think it was Jame and Brokey were the two AWPers who are attempting less openers than him on T side, for example. So it's just hard to have much coming from your AWPer in that sense. And that's already a big problem for me on the team. In terms of the additions, I always like Config as a player. I think especially here when he probably can get slotted into a system, and I imagine Glaive will be able to work well with him. That's what I want to see. I want to see Glaive going in first and just allowing Config to use that aim on the follow-up. And then BlameF is the one where this is the one that has the more question marks, I guess it's fair to say, because I was reading interviews where Glaive was saying he wants BlameF in the future to be helping out with calls and sometimes be coming up with his own ideas. But the problem I see with that is whenever I saw Complexity play, it always had to be a call from the start of the round that was set up for BlameF to get into a position. So unless he is going to come in and literally call around from the start to maybe exploit a hole, that could work. And Glaive is the kind of guy who I think could be open to letting that happen and also have the authority to say when he doesn't want that to happen. But I also think it's probably mostly going to have a structure at the start of the round because BlameF seems like the kind of player who wants to exploit those holes and really like think ahead of time exactly what his idea is in the round. So that's the thing I'm most interested in, seeing how BlameF slots in.
There's obviously a lot you can dive in on there, Paladin. What would you pick up from?
I mean, I'll continue on that BlameF angle. You have to have such a huge system to implement this guy in. And I know he says, look, I'm here to like fit into this team and like learn and all this stuff. But the fact of the matter is there are certain there's a certain play style that he's made on Complexity that he has to unlearn, and unlearning a system like that is very difficult, especially as selfish of a system that it is to be calling around yourself. And I'm obviously just using that in terms of the game itself, not necessarily him, obviously.
Just resources, sorry, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And so obviously integrating something like that in the mid to late round where he has to maybe make a fly call, that's not really going to work in Glaive's system initially, at least. And I'm really curious as to see how it's going to work in the game, because that's something that can make or break rounds, right? You have 30 seconds left on the clock and you have to make a go decision. And if BlameF decides to jump the gun, or if Glaive decides to jump the gun, if they're not on the same page there, it could really fall apart. And a lot of rounds, especially on maps like Ancient that an NiP might want to pick, that's where they could really, really fall apart. So I'm really interested as to what BlameF can do as far as integration is concerned. But for me, a bigger question mark than BlameF is Config, because we haven't seen him in so long, and I just don't know what to expect from him. An injury on the wrist is something insane to like go through and recover from, because I mean he is generally a flicky style player. He has a little bit of a higher sense, and he's such an integral portion to every team that he's a part of. So if Config arrives at this tournament, we could potentially even find him to be a dark horse, in my opinion, because of how powerful he is as a piece on a team. But at the same time, I'm not expecting that from him out the gates, and I'm not expecting that out of the gates in this series, and I'm expecting something a little bit more tapered off, and him not to have enough impact for it to really cause a ruckus in this series specifically. But Config, especially, I think is just a huge question mark because he has such a high ceiling, but we also know that he has a pretty low floor if he's not motivated or just warmed into the game.
Yeah, a couple of angles there. One on the config thing. I'll even say this as well, right? Of all the players you wouldn't want to have potentially a literal physical injury inhibit them, it would be someone whose entire fucking brand was having the most amazing aim. So, like, it's not even like, like, I don't know, no diss to config, but if he had just average players' aim, his decision making would become potentially very questionable, not least because, by the way, the decisions that are correct when you can win like 80% of gunfights aren't correct when you're like some player. My example would probably be like Amanek or something, like you have to play off positioning, angles, like timing and so things that you never have to worry about if you config. And then the other thing is, I know a lot of people thought I was just hating on Astralis because I've obviously like spelled out their doom with the financial stuff the last couple of years. But the real reason I don't believe in this lineup, especially not immediately, because normally, by the way, it's the other way around. If you get a couple of good players in, you get the honeymoon period when the idea is, you don't know what you're doing, but as a result, that is the other team. And if they just play well because of the confidence angle, they can hit the ground running. The reason I don't personally buy that here is because I'll combine the points you guys are making. We've got 3 totally distinct tactical presences in this team now. We've got Glaive, and by the way, we don't even really know how Glaive's going to call. He's not with Zonic anymore. Doesn't have those same players from last Astralis. Who can know? Because, by the way, this guy definitely can do all styles of IGLing, so maybe he's going to switch up his style. Then you got Blame F, as you guys point out. It's not just that he was the lurker and could do secondary calls, because if he does that, by the way, very famous role to have. Cold Zera, Nico, loads of great players have done that. His problem was, as you said, it was almost, he was more in the vein of happy and envious. He actually called around himself to make himself the star and win the round. That's all great, but if you're not the IGL, it doesn't exist anymore. And then the third one everyone's forgetting is the new coach, Ave. Now, he obviously only really has experience from North and North Academy, so who the fuck knows what he's going to do? Who knows what his vision of the game is? And obviously, 0 official games played. He hasn't had a chance to actually implement anything yet. So even though normally, just on paper, I'd say, look, some of these players fuck around, maybe they win the game. I don't think they do, actually. I think, if anything, they look primed to sort of start a bit sloppy and all over the place. So you alluded to it there, Paladin. The real problem is we can't really know what the back pool of Astralis is, right? But I will say, from the major, it looked like even with the lineup at the major, which technically people don't know had never played together aside from the major, because it was Lucky plus Glaive, and then obviously they had the other players in. That team basically just went with the old classics, and they tried to get onto Inferno and Nuke, basically the old Inferno and Nuke classic from Astralis. Right, on the NiP side, you mentioned Inferno, right? What do you think the NiP side should be for this series? Like, should they try a cheeky ancient pick or something? Should they stick with boring it, simple maps? What should they do? Obviously, maybe they can even get Inferno picked into them, who knows?
Yeah, I mean, they can pick into Ancient for sure, but that requires a little bit more guts. And I don't know who was talking about this previously, but the banned Molotov that they love throwing, I believe it was Maui.
Yeah,
this one, yes.
Yeah, and the fact that it was banned is going to hurt them. And yes. I don't know if they have real plans planned out. They have a 90% win rate on it, which is great. But again, confidence is a big thing at a tournament like this. And I'm sure they'll want to go to something a little bit more comfortable. And they've been picking Inferno a lot at the major especially. And they played Astralis recently, granted different 5-man lineup, but they banged them out on Inferno, right? And if you
they're just on the veto now, so I'll just have to jump in. Basically, it turns out Astralis themselves banned Ancient for exactly this reason. NiP banned Vertigo, so Astralis picks Nuke. Of course, it went off the screen right just when they did that. Let me have a look. I think it was Overpass was the one. Yeah, NiP picks Overpass, and then the decider is Mirage. Just Hawker, react to this. What do you think?
I was curious about Mirage because that was the map I was looking at and saying, so historically, you think of Blame F on Complexity, Mirage was kind of their map, yeah. And obviously Astralis just never really played it. So that's actually kind of exciting to me. I wonder whether that's just them saying, okay, well, let's just play a loose map and let's just try and get Blame F to get some stuff going. Overpass is the nitpick. I think makes sense. Just when you're going up against Astralis, you don't know what they're going to have structure-wise. That is the map where if your structure isn't in place, you're just going to be able to probably pick them apart realistically. And honestly, the same kind of goes for Nuke in a sense. So yeah, the Astralis pick of Nuke, I don't know. We'll see on that.
Vice can wreak havoc, right? Nuke and Overpass are historically some of his best maps. And if you know how Glaive calls, at least some of the basics understandings of it, perhaps you can get in his head. Of course, we haven't taken the device angle of this whole matchup, but psychologically, he should have the edge in this matchup. If he wants to show that he's a great player, he's going to lay down the hurt on both of these maps. And hopefully we don't even have to get to Mirage, because I don't think Device is necessarily star-studded on that map in particular, but I think it'll be over before we even get there.
Yeah, I will say on that angle, even though at the major he was a bit underwhelming, like he never really banged out in most of the big matches and obviously didn't do fuck all in the playoffs. Like he was actually having a perfectly fine time, of course, when he played against the Astralis team. It was one of the games that was piss easy. It's the one, if you remember, they 16-1 them on Infernal. So yeah, in this world, I would expect, by the way, I think some of that was the major, the pressure of being in Sweden, all that. The team generally didn't look very good, minus Hampus. I would just say, I would expect personally Device has the bounce back here, and it's the reason why, if you remember at the RMR, for example, he was the best player, basically. So, want to see more cool, funny, interesting clips based on topics from my content? Well, subscribe to this channel then, or, be a pleb and don't.